Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with me today to help solve a problem that's really close to my heart. I'll start by telling you a few fun facts about myself. My name is Lauren Maffeo. I'm a senior content analyst at GetApp, which is TripAdvisor for software. So we help small and mid-sized businesses find the right software for HR, project management, anything else they need, and I write research that helps them do that. I'm also currently studying to get a certificate in AI from MIT, #imposter syndrome. And last year, I helped organize Women's Startup Challenge Europe, which was the largest venture capital competition for women-led startups on the continent in terms of prize money. And I also helped peer review research on the topic that I'm here to talk with you about today. This is an ironic presentation for me to give. I don't really want to talk about diversity or like talking about diversity because I've learned through experience that no matter what you think about the topic, it makes people uncomfortable. If you're a detractor of diversity, you're thinking, oh, here we go again. Another woman talking about why we need to hire people based on appearance and not talent. Who's heard some variation of that in your career? Yeah. I heard it not long ago. But we're at Women Tech Makers, so I do feel comfortable assuming that everyone here wants to see more diverse talent come through their pipelines and they want more inclusive teams. In which case, you're probably sitting there thinking, oh, here we go again, another presentation about diversity where she's going to tell me we need diversity, which I already know, and she's not going to tell me how to solve it in my company. So just by being up here, I'm making you uncomfortable. But I have good news. I'm not actually here to talk about diversity. I'm here to talk about why it's only one aspect of the root problem you're trying to solve. Because if businesses don't start with inclusion at the center of their D&I efforts, the diversity pipelines that you're trying to build will continue to fail. So let's review some detracting arguments for D&I initiatives. Some people say that they're either not needed and/or lowering the bar. I won't get into how offensive that is or why, because you already know. Other people say that they ignore the fact that we're living in a post-racial, post-feminist world where people can get by on their own and they don't need an extra hand. Look at Sheryl Sandberg and Ursula Burns. 2 women made it, so every woman can make it, right? And the third argument is that D&I initiatives already exist in droves, and so we really don't need more of them since there's so much already out there. Of those 3 arguments, there is some merit in the last one because we have more diversity initiatives than ever before at school and business levels. Programs like Girls in Technology actively recruit high school girls and usher them into STEM majors and careers. I am a mentor for the Girls in Technology chapter in Maryland. I wasn't in high school that long ago, and there were no initiatives that I knew of at the time like that. And so to me, that is a sign of progress that we're already encouraging girls that young to pursue careers in high-demand fields like STEM. This is happening at the company level as well. Businesses like GE and SAP actively recruit minorities. SAP in particular is known for its Autism at Work program, which pairs people with autism with more senior people, and it has been very successful in many ways. Overall, Fortune 500 companies in the US spend $2.5 million each year recruiting minority candidates, and that number is expected to at least double, if not quadruple, in just a few short years. But if all of that's enough, then why are 11% of computer science degrees in the US given to Black or Hispanic students, but 5% of tech workers self-identify as Black or Hispanic? If that's enough, why do new dads get pay raises when they become parents while working moms lose $500,000 over the course of their lifetimes? If that's enough, why does the World Economic Forum's latest gender gap report predict that it will take 217 years to achieve gender parity? Spoiler alert, it's not enough. It's not enough because in tech, the average tenure at a tech disruptor, which is defined as a company like Apple or Google, is less than 2 years for technical roles like software engineering. It's not enough because Facebook, of these tech disruptors, is the only one that has average tenure longer than 2 years, and it's something like 2.2, so it's still very short. And when Susan Fowler started her career as an engineer at Uber, her unit was 25% women. By the time she tried transferring to another engineering organization, her unit was down to 10%, and that was just within a year, and it was not that long ago. So since diversity alone is not enough, we have to again ask the question why. Why is that the case, and why is all of this investment not yielding the returns that we really want it to? I blame this on something called the diversity paradox, and to illustrate it, I'll share a story with you. Dr. Marilyn Sanders Mobley is the VP for Diversity and Inclusion at Case Western Reserve University in Ohio. And in her TED Talk, she talked about being accepted to study at Barnard College in New York, which was a huge opportunity for her. Her mom really thought it was important that she live on an integrated floor instead of a floor for African American students, and she wanted to please her mother, like many of us do, so she did decide to stay on that integrated floor. And this is what she said about her experience. I felt so alien, so marginalized, so unincluded and unengaged that I said to my mom the second year, "I'm sorry, I'm going up on the black floor." That decision made all the difference in the world. And she goes on to say that she thinks it's the reason why she stayed at school and on the dean's list. And without that move, she probably would have left Barnard altogether. This, to me, illustrates perfectly why, if companies don't put inclusion at the center of their efforts, their diversity initiatives will continue to fail. So this is a big problem, and it doesn't have easy solutions, but we will start to solve it together in the time we have by doing a few things. We'll start by outlining the difference between diversity and inclusion. Then we'll go on to talking about why inclusion has to come before diversity. We'll look at some barriers to retaining inclusive teams. And finally, we'll talk about 5 tips that you can use to start leading inclusive teams in your own company when you leave today. So what's the difference between diversity and inclusion? They ultimately address different aspects of the same problem, which is exclusionary success. To quote Verna Myers, diversity is being asked to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. To learn why inclusion matters, we have to consider the corporate motivation for diversity and the history of diversity initiatives within corporate companies. They were, by and large, conceived of as a compliance issue. And so some businesses do still think that if they just hire X amount of women, they've fixed diversity and will avoid getting sued. But you know as well as I do, nobody joins technology because you want to be the token X person. That's not why you join this field. You join this field because we want to be creators in the kingdom of culture. And we all want to have an equal hand in shaping products and services that people around the world use and will use to come. This isn't just an abstract, it really does affect how employees choose their own businesses. Deloitte surveyed 1,300 North American workers recently and found that 80% said inclusion matters when they choose an employer. In that same survey, 72% of employees also said they'd consider leaving one company for another that's more inclusive. And on a personal note, I was formerly in a support group for survivors of sexual assault, and it was one of the most diverse groups I've ever been a part of, and I loved it for that reason. There was a woman in that group, a woman of color, who said that she was in such a toxic environment at work, but she knew the likelihood of finding a diverse environment like that was so rare, she was willing to stay. That's how much it matters to see people at work who look like you. People will stay in environments that they know they shouldn't be in because they know the likelihood of finding that elsewhere is so small, and that really has to change. And so all of this goes to show that if you're not inclusive, you ultimately won't build a diverse pipeline. I've said that before, but it really is worth repeating to illustrate why inclusion is so important. But we can't talk about that without acknowledging a lot of the barriers to co-working in the kingdom of culture. If that's the solution, then what is it that's preventing us from making it happen? There are many, but we'll start with 3 that really are defining. The first is that we can't trust the system contrary to popular wisdom. Rachel and Rebecca really hit this home in their presentation earlier today. As I mentioned, many people view diversity as a compliance problem in HR rather than a business strategy. The challenge is that diversity debt, the idea that you have to make up for decades of structural inequity, is rooted in structural inequity. And so it's not enough to just change individual people or companies. There has to be a collective move upwards to do that. And I think we also, when we're talking to potential allies, especially men, you have to keep in mind that, again, the structure is broken. Individual people and companies absolutely do contribute to the problem, but people aren't broken. The system is broken, and we all have to work together to fix it. The second challenge is that the pace of D&I initiatives doesn't match the pace of business today. Businesses are expected to do more in less time than ever before, and it really upends everything from their business models to collaboration. Everything is changing at lightning speed, but we won't see the impact of many of today's D&I efforts for generations to come. And so if you're looking at D&I purely as a short-term gain, it can feel like any investments you're making in it as a business are not worthwhile, when actually the opposite is true. You have to plant the seeds now in order to yield the flowers for decades to come. But again, if you're looking at it purely from a short-term rewards perspective, you're ultimately going to be disappointed because you're not measuring it correctly. The third is that diversity, as it's often discussed, isn't intersectional enough. Too often, in business conversations and in general, diversity is really code for white, college-educated, middle-class women. And I know you're thinking, duh, Lauren, I don't need you to tell me that. But the fact is that this still happens, and so it's not unspoken, and it does need to be addressed. Because diversity is about so much more than that. What about race, gender identity, veteran status, neurodiversity, things like autism? What about personality? This is a huge one that really often gets overlooked in D&I initiatives. And I'll use a specific role in tech to illustrate this. How many of you have taken the Myers-Briggs test? Okay, good amount. How many of you know what your classification is then? Same amount. How many of you are INTJs? Well, you would make great chief information officers because the vast majority of CIOs today, somewhere between 75 and 80%, are INTJs, even though they are 2% of the entire population. I am an ENFP, so I'm basically the polar opposite of the ideal CIO personality. I have a friend who says that I'm actually an ENFJ because I'm too type A to be an ENFP, but this isn't therapy. And my bigger point is that the actual classification really doesn't matter. What matters is if you have 80% of C-suite leaders in a particular role at Fortune 500 companies who all think like this, how do you think that impacts their hiring, who they promote, who they respect from within? INTJs are architects, so will an analytical leader who makes decisions based on data give the same appreciation to a separate leader who makes decisions based on people and emotions? On that same note, do you hire and promote colleagues who have a different style than you do? We all like to be surrounded by people who reinforce what we're good at and what we like, and that's great to a certain extent, but it does lead to a lot of blind spots, and when everyone's doing it, it has a ripple effect. But I didn't ask that last question to shame you. We all have unconscious bias, no matter who we are, and we all have to actively work against it since it's something that is inherent within us. But the good news is, even though this is a big challenge, there are concrete steps that you can take to lead and retain inclusive teams. I heard questions earlier today about how you can actually do that and how you can be a leader in your organization to make it more inclusive. And I really hope that the tips I'll share today will give you the tools you need to do that. The first one is simple. Stop saying you're a meritocracy. Who here has worked for a tech company that called itself a meritocracy? Yeah, so life hack, if you're interviewing with a tech company and they describe themselves as a meritocracy, run away. Because many management studies show organizations that say they're merit-based are more likely to discriminate because they're less aware of unconscious bias, and that means they're not working to fix it. No team, no matter how aware you are, is magically meritocratic. A team becomes meritocratic because they take thoughtful, deliberate action to do it. But no organization is inherently a meritocracy. It doesn't work that way. The good news is self-aware leaders lead more profitable companies. This is something else that management research is pretty clear on and several studies have shown. And this means that self-awareness is actually a business advantage, and it's why inclusion is a strategy in and of itself that should be built into your business. This is a challenge for bigger companies because it is harder to be retroactively inclusive and make up for decades of diversity debt. And so the good news is that if you're in a startup, you actually have a competitive advantage because you can build inclusion into your business from the outset, you can make an inclusive environment from the start, and you can work to promote from within, and you can counter a lot of the challenges that big corporations are facing today. The second step that you can take is to ask yourself who you're spending time with both online and in the wild. It starts by reviewing your real and digital networks, and it means taking an honest look at who you surround yourself with on a daily basis. It's something that's so inherent in all of us that we don't really take the time to do it, but it's actually a really important action that might surprise you in terms of the results. So start by looking at your company page. How diverse, honestly, is your company today? Are you seeing a sea of faces that look exactly like you? Do you see people who look nothing like you? Both of those are worth exploring. Who are you connected to on LinkedIn? Again, does everybody in your network look exactly like you? Do they work in the same roles, have the same beliefs? Who are you following on Twitter? Who are you curating as part of the people you're following, and who are you allowing into your feed to receive information from? To counter this, you can actively work to find voices in your field that differ from your own. It really might be work, it probably will be, and that's the point, because these voices are not always obvious to you, but doing the groundwork of finding them will make you a smarter employee, manager, and business leader as you grow in your career. So always make sure that you're adding diverse viewpoints and perspectives to your network, and if you're looking for a starting resource for tech, Project Include is a great place to start. And after that, you can start taking input from colleagues with different backgrounds, perspectives, and experiences before you make decisions. You can do this even if you're not a manager yet. If there's something you have to do for work, there's big power in reaching out to colleagues you trust, even if they might have different takes on the solution. It has a big impact on how you ultimately make choices, and the younger you start practicing that, the better you'll be once you're leading your own team. The third is to ask for anonymous feedback. And this is a scary one because I always say don't ask a question if you don't want the answer. You might not like the answer, but it's one that you need to have if you want to work to change things in the future. So you can automate this process, and that's a good aspect of it. You can write a rolling, direct ask for feedback from your team about how different diversity and inclusion topics affect them. And this is a really broad topic. It can be asking them about anything from Black Lives Matter to what it's like to live with anxiety. And you're not directly asking them about these things, but the idea is to give them space to be able to openly discuss these things at work in a way that's safe. So to do that, you can make a Google survey that's anonymous and confidential so that people feel comfortable confiding without revealing anything they don't want to. And then you can share it regularly, maybe every other week, maybe once a month, you have to decide, but you can share it regularly with people via email, Slack, or whatever communication tool your team prefers to use. And then, as a next step, you can create digital and in-person spaces for colleagues to share how different events impact them. This can be anything from starting a current events channel in your company Slack team where people can discuss things. You can start a D&I Slack channel where people can include articles. And you can also give your colleagues the space to organize lunches where they talk about things like mental illness and how it affects their ability to work. The one caveat I'll give about this one is that your job as a leader is to provide the space for employees to share this information in a way that makes them comfortable. It's not their job to teach your team about diversity, and it's not your job to teach people in your companies about diversity unless you want to. If you want to and you're volunteering for it, that's great, but it is work, and it's extra work on top of what you already do. So if you don't want to do it, you have every right to say no. It's a personal choice. And on that note, this quote from Chanel Cristobal, who's the university recruiting lead at Asana, sums that up well. Personally, the most included I've felt at work is when we've talked about how current events affect different people of color. By not separating work from personal lives, companies can make people feel like their whole selves matter. The fourth step is to create and reward skills-based teams. So as just one example, if you have a pessimist on your team, you can actually use that to everyone's advantage by having them run the pre-mortem on a project. I'm serious. I'm not making this up. I know that's knowing laughter, but this is actually a good secret. It counters optimism bias and groupthink, and it plays to one particular person's unique strengths in a way that benefits everybody. And it saves businesses substantial time and money. Another way to do this is to counter interruptions in meetings. Who's been interrupted in a meeting? Everyone. Oh, well, not everyone, but quite a few people. And I don't know about you, but when I'm interrupted in a public setting, my immediate reaction is to just shut down and stop talking. And that is not necessarily a healthy coping mechanism, but the bigger point is that having one loud voice in the room can really change the dynamic in a meeting. And so if you're a meeting leader, you want to get out in front of that and make sure that everybody is able to speak and contribute. So one way to do that is to send meeting agendas a day in advance. You can ask everybody who's going to be in the meeting to prep their own remarks. And ultimately, this gives people who are more introverted time to reflect rather than putting them on the spot in a meeting in an environment where they're more likely to be uncomfortable. This is important because the introverts might feel more comfortable, but this whole process might really feel uncomfortable in general. Homogeneous teams that are more alike feel more confident, but they actually underperform diverse teams, which conversely don't often feel as confident or harmonious. So to beat this, you can reward teams for collective success. One way to do this, a CEO at a company I worked for gave all of us surprise bonuses when we overperformed one quarter. And that's kind of an extreme example, but it was a great surprise. We weren't expecting it, and so we weren't doing the work to get the reward. And it rewarded everyone because it acknowledged that we all played a role in making that goal happen for the startup. Your goal here is not to replace individual rewards. I'm not saying that everybody should get the same reward and that you should do away with bonuses and pay increases. That's not true at all. Your goal here really is to help team members use their strengths to benefit the collective. And your goal as a leader is ultimately to reward everyone for a shared outcome after all members of the team have played to their strengths. The fifth step is the longest and most involved. It's launching pilot programs and measuring the results, because if you're in business, you already know that if you're not measuring it, you don't care that much about it. Now, in this context, it's important to remember hiring is hard, retaining is harder, and promoting is the hardest. So you want to think about what makes employees advance in the workforce. What does management data say? We know that employees advance when senior colleagues do two things. They invest in younger colleagues based on potential, not performance, and they emphasize sponsorships, not mentorships. This was touched on earlier today, and I think it's a really important point because so much of the conversation about mentors, I would say all of the conversation about mentors, is very gendered in a way that ultimately doesn't advocate for inclusion. And that's because women are assigned mentors more often than men, but men receive 15% more promotions than women. So data from management studies out of Stanford and other universities shows that mentorship, it has its place. Like I said, I'm a mentor for high school girls, but ultimately it doesn't equal advancement. We don't have research proving that yet. What we know works is being sponsored by a senior employee who has clout with the most senior people. So what's a sponsor? How does it differ from having a mentor? A sponsor does 4 big things. They are a senior staff member who has a protege. They use their influence to promote proteges. They give and make active connections for proteges. And, this is probably most crucial, they connect proteges to high-profile projects within the organization. Ultimately, a sponsor is somebody who is sitting with the CEO, and when the CEO asks who's the best person to do X, the sponsor is there advocating for their protege to get them up the ladder. Within the tech world, I think Atlassian is a great case study of this in action. Senior leaders not long ago heard junior women say that they were unsure how to move from the more junior roles in the company to more mid-level and senior roles. So they saw that as an opportunity to launch an internal pilot leadership program to fix that problem. They created control and variable groups, so the women in their control group were being monitored and compared against their women colleagues in the organization who weren't in the study. And then the organizers compared 2 things. They compared career growth in the form of things like stretch promotions, or stretch projects rather, promotions, pay raises. And they also compared participants' self-assessments of competence and capability, both before the program and after. So their success metrics for this program that they were measuring were career growth and assessments. If Atlassian found that the women who participated in that study had substantial increases in their careers via pay raises and promotions, et cetera, and they also rated themselves higher in terms of competency after the study, they would consider it a success. And if that didn't happen, they knew that they needed to revise the program so that it would work more efficiently the next time. So the idea is to learn quickly what works and doesn't so that you can adapt. And within 1 year, Atlassian's female technical workforce jumped from 10% to 18%. And its latest entry-level engineering cohort was 57% female. And so this really shows that inclusion begets diversity. If you are actively working inside your company to be inclusive, you will start attracting more diverse candidates who want to work for you. And that really reinforces, again, do all of these 5 steps before you put an active effort out there to try and start recruiting diverse candidates. Because the change really does start from within. And I'll end my part with a quote from Schmitt. He says, "There is nothing good or bad about culture. There are only differences. Understanding cultural differences are often the determining factor in success or failure in business." So that's the end of my time I'm talking. I've thrown a lot at you, but this is a room full of tech makers and problem solvers, and the diversity and inclusion is a big problem to solve. So for the rest of our time together, I want to put you to work. Now, you were asked earlier today to share with a stranger or the person next to you about a time that you felt excluded. And so what I want you to do now is I want you to sit next to someone who you haven't met So if you have to move around, feel free to do that. And I want you to be specific about telling each other a time when you felt excluded at work. So it could be that you found out team members went to happy hour without you. It could be that you were excluded from a meeting. It could be that you got a perfect performance review, and when you asked if you were ready for a promotion, you were told that you're not there yet. It can be, there are a myriad of examples, but the idea is to keep it in a company business context. And I'm doing this because at the end of the day, exclusion is powerfully painful. We've all been excluded from different things at different times, and it's a really tough pill to swallow, and it really comes with a lot of shame. So the first step in overcoming shame is to share your story so that other people feel less alone. And then once you've done that with your partner, I want you to spend about 10 minutes with them, putting yourself in the shoes of a manager. Let's say you find out as a manager that someone on your team was excluded from a team happy hour. What are you going to do as a manager to make sure that that person feels included and that the problem is addressed? Because as the leader, that's your responsibility to figure out. And if you can start thinking today about ways to make everyone on your team feel like they belong, you're already light years ahead of where you need to be. So I'll give you 10 to 12 minutes to find a new friend and then do this exercise, and then we'll share some of the results once we're done. All right, thanks for doing that exercise. I'm really glad that I saw so many conversations going. So I hope you all made some new friends and came up with some more solutions to add on to the 5 that we talked about today. As a final step, I would love if people want to share sometimes that either they or their partners felt excluded and the solutions you came up with to combat them. And you can either speak for yourself, or if your partners are happy to have you speak for them, that's fine too. It's really just about sharing a time you felt excluded and what you decided that you're going to do as a manager to make sure nobody else feels the same pain you did.
Hi, I want to share my friend's story here, because I think it's very common to a lot of people. I luckily haven't seen it happen before my eyes, but I would be super mad if I was in her place. But a male colleague that was underqualified compared to her got a promotion, and she didn't, because he was more vocal about it, and he kept asking for it, and he got it, and she didn't. And that actually reminded me of a few articles I already read about how when women try to negotiate their salaries, they're punished, and women trying to get promotions are more punished than men actually get them. And I think it's a recurring topic, and a lot of people can probably relate to that.
It is. It's such a double bind, because if you don't ask, you don't get, but it's not, we all know it's not as simple as asking, because you're also more likely to be penalized for asking. It really is a long game, I've found, in terms of negotiation. So one thing that works really well is if you see someone in the role above you and it's someone you're friendly with, if you ask them to coffee or lunch and offer to pay for it and ask how they got there, I have found that works really well, because you're building relationships internally in a way that's authentic. And from the business perspective, it's really important, because management research is great in terms of giving us data, but it doesn't account for nuance in your company, for example. So your company is very different than mine, and what we're going to have to do to succeed in our own companies is different. And so I have found that that's a good way to build relationships in advance, is to find someone in the role above you, take them out to coffee or lunch, and find out what they did to get there, and then you can adapt it as needed. Does anybody else have anything they want to share? Yep, over to the right. Oh, I'll get you.
I'd like to share what I heard. So, remind me your name? Megan was basically, she was working on a project with different co-workers, and one day they decided to go for whether a social activity without her inviting her, and a decision was made to change the project. And basically, when they got back, they never really talked to anybody about it. Not anybody, but they didn't talk to her about it. So then she was ready to end in her project, and they said, oh, actually, we took another decision. We took another direction on the project, and you actually don't have to work on this anymore, and we have to work on something else. So that's the first part. And the other part is like, how would she manage it? If she was a manager, she would have said, if she had someone reporting it. That's not exactly the way it should be done. Everybody should be informed, and I'm going to verify and see how the procedure can be revised so that this doesn't happen again.
Yeah, work-life integration that's an interesting one to me because it goes into the question of how socializing with colleagues can impact business outcomes. I mean, we don't want to think that they do and that they're completely separate, but it does have consequences like that. And if you don't have a leader that's willing to acknowledge when the two are coinciding in a bad way, it does lead to problems like that, for sure. Over there.
On our end, my friend here, who's Isabel, was actually passed over on being able to train new colleagues. And initially she rationalized it that because she was part-time, because of this, because of that, and she wasn't too sure why. And then new colleagues came in again, and she was full-time at this point. Great at her job, and once again passed over by someone who was brand new to train the new person. Why? And I think a lot of us probably have gone through this, and I think just from a manager point of view, I think the having more transparency as to what the selection criteria is, why did this person get selected, why did you not even talk to me about it, it would be good to know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
exactly.
transparency.
Especially if it's something you actively want to do. I mean, again, it's tough because you have to navigate people dynamics and internal politics, but if that's something you actively want to do, I think saying that is important, but then that doesn't address what can happen afterwards. But yeah, and transparency around why people are chosen. If they can't provide that, I think that's a clue. It's a bad one.
So I was speaking with, je peux dire toi? OK, Marie-Hélène. Non, je me souvenais, je voulais juste m'assurer que c'était pas anonyme. Donc, oh yeah, in English, sorry. So Marie-Hélène was, I guess, a few months into her job, and her manager believed in her and hired her without experience, just really liked her attitude. But then after a while, he seemed, I guess maybe his impression was that he was coaching her, but in fact, she didn't really feel that way. He would kind of push her, like if she got either I guess the trust wasn't there. She didn't feel like he trusted her because she would do something and then he would say, well, did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do that? And kind of push her and push her, but she didn't see him do that to other people. And he basically just trusted them and said, okay, just accepted at face value that they did their job, where he would question her. Yeah. So she felt, like, why, does he not trust me? Why, that maybe that's not my approach or whatever. So I guess we were talking about other stuff, so we didn't finish the exercise. But I guess as a manager, what would I do, or what would she do?
Well, it's kind of both. It was working together to find a solution, and basically it's just the question of, you were in this bad scenario at work, and what would you have wanted your boss to do, and what kind of boss do you want to be, either now or when it's your turn?
Do you want to answer that? I mean, I guess I can take a stab at it, and I think that as a manager, that's probably an error. That could be an error that I might make without realizing it. But at the same time, instead of feeding the person the answer, ask them, is there anything else you would have, had you had more time, is there anything else you would have done? Would you have done something differently, or would you have taken, maybe more coaching approach than telling somebody how to do something? Mm-hmm. I don't know.
So Cara and I were talking about, it turns out we're both very opinionated and talk a lot on our teams. And we were saying that we both have the common experience of feeling excluded, but because we've consciously excluded ourselves from things that other people on the team are doing. So for me, the main example would be everyone on the team going out for lunch and them being like, you should come, and me being like, I'm not going to come. I'm going to stay, but have fun. And that is more often the experience of being excluded, but only because there's a lot of work that goes into like getting yourself into a group that you don't really feel part of.
Yep. No, it's true. I saw a meme not that long ago that said, why don't my friends understand that I want to be invited to everything and not go to anything? And I think especially at work, that's kind of true. I mean, if you're not invited, that's exclusionary, and yet you don't always want to go. And I see this with myself, like I said, in meetings too. I mean, my default, if there's someone who's really loud and overbearing in a meeting, it doesn't, whether it's at work or in life, my default is to just be like, fine, I'm not going to talk. And I don't actually say that. I just literally don't talk and shut down. And that's not healthy either. It's a defense mechanism. It's something I'm definitely working on. But it's good to keep in mind too. Sometimes, I think this is the minority of cases, but sometimes exclusion is, in examples like that, self-imposed. And again, that's not the norm, but sometimes it is.
Well, we were talking a bit more of kind of when you start your career. So I was just sharing my story when I was still in university and I needed a job that could kind of cope with school and then make money at the same time. So you apply for very simple jobs. But the problem or the way you get excluded is that you're just that. You're the student who took the basic job, and that's pretty much it. And you're kind of in that box, and you're never part of the adults table, and you're just always going to be the intern that gets paid the basic job. But of course, at that point, you're just very passionate about what you do, so you start growing. And so in my personal story, my job became like from a social media researcher, whatever that meant, to like giving workshops and training the adults. But I think where we were talking is, since some organizations have that problem of hierarchy, and you're at the very bottom, even when I did ask for a raise and I said, it's very fun that I'm learning so much and I'm bringing so much to the table, but then I think I deserve more, the answer was no, because I'm at the bottom of the hierarchy and I'm just a student doing the student job. So then I guess for us, that's what we said in terms of solution, like maybe if you are going to have those basic jobs, still understand that it's people that are learning and have capabilities, and then if you do have to have like a more structured hierarchy because that's the need of your business, still address kind of those situations or foresee those type of situations.
Yeah, we could easily do an entire session on internships. And I mean, I'm coming from a US perspective where there's a lot less regulation around them than there are in other countries. And so as an example, our sister office for my company in Barcelona, we have interns that stay there for months at a time, and they're paid, and they really are, I mean, they take active roles doing the work that they're interning for. I mean, our old graphic designer was an intern for 10 months, and she was fantastic. I couldn't tell that she was an intern because her work quality was easily that of a professional. And I think when you're interviewing for internships, that's actually really important. There are gentle ways to ask about what the team dynamics are like. Like, you don't have to say, are you a top-down, hierarchy, but you can ask questions about how teams work together, and that'll give you clues about how hierarchical the internal structure is, because that's not ultimately a place where you might be able to grow. And like I said, internships deserve their own presentation for another time. I think we're out out of time, but I will be here for the rest of the day, and I'm happy to talk to more of you about this. And I want to thank you again for being such a great audience and helping me solve this D&I problem. Thank you.